Taking a look at Philippians chapter 4, verses 2 through verse 9. While I have your attention, I will make notice that there is an SLT meeting tomorrow evening at 6:30. It is 6:30, Stan. I realize this is somewhat of an inside joke that many of you aren't getting. I've been here almost 2 years. We have SLT every month. Stan Drudge has never missed an SLT meeting until last month. And he said it slipped his mind. He just forgot. Perfectly acceptable. Well, we're not letting Stan forget. He's received at least 3 emails. It's now been mentioned twice from here. I will probably text him tomorrow just to make sure that. While we're covering some things, I'm also going to make mention, because I have heard some folks asking, and this is kind of off the path, but I thought it was something that was important that you hear. So hopefully you've made it to Philippians chapter 4. If not, turn while listening. I wanted to make sure that everyone realized when we appointed the music search committee a couple weeks ago, there were a couple reasons for that. One is that my desire is that Bethlehem Baptist Church does everything above board and beyond reproach. I say that and I make mention because I've heard people say, well, why are we doing that? Isn't John doing a good job? Why are we putting this together? I'm not comfortable. I'm letting you know. We're trying to do everything above board, no closed backroom meetings where major issues are decided by 1 or 2 people. We did not feel it appropriate just to remove partial titles and anoint. That is not our doing. That is the church's doing. We want buy-in from the church so the whole church can be excited and we move onward together, not just this person or that person. And a third reason, and perhaps the most important, is whoever serves in that role will be called by God and the church. There are I know you're not going to believe this, but there are moments that are difficult in the lives of ministers and pastors where all they rely upon is their calling. They're there because they know God and the church desired it. Can you imagine if one person called a minister? Or 2 people? In those moments of questioning and doubting and wonder, they'd only have this one or that one to go back to. And that's not the way it's meant to be. It's a church and God calling so that we all are behind and supportive of our staff. I felt I needed to share that with you because there were some people saying, well, why are we doing this? Why is this happening now? It's not that we're not happy, not satisfied, not that we're angry, not that we want something different or don't want something different. It's just that we operate the way the people of God are supposed to operate. Now, having said that, Philippians chapter 4, verses 2 through 9, SLT, Monday, 6:30. I entreat you, Euodia, and I entreat Syntyche to agree in the Lord. Yes, I ask you also, true companion, help these women who have labored side by side with me in the gospel, together with Clement and the rest of my fellow workers, whose names are in the book of life. Rejoice in the Lord always, and again I will say, rejoice. Let your reasonableness be known to everyone. The Lord is at hand. Do not be anxious about anything, but in everything by prayer and supplication, with thanksgiving, let your requests be made known to God. And the peace of God, which surpasses all understanding, will guard your hearts and your minds in Christ Jesus. Finally, brothers, whatever is true, whatever is honorable, whatever is just, whatever is pure, whatever is lovely, whatever is commendable, if there is any excellence, if there is anything worthy of praise, think about these things. What you have learned and received and heard and seen in me, practice these things, and the God of peace will be with you. You remember back in chapter 2, that seems like so long ago, but it was probably only, 6 weeks? Paul wrapped up chapter 2, well, he kind of summarized it in the early going, that the Christian church and Christian people are supposed to be about unity, humility, and service. In chapter 3, he moved us and he said, look, here is the goal that we all should be aiming for. Now let us strive and train and work to hit that goal. We thought he was just teaching to teach. But here in verse 2 of chapter 4, we see the point behind the teaching. I entreat you, Euodia, and I entreat Syntyche, to agree in the Lord. Yes, I ask you also, true companion, help these women who have labored side by side with me in the gospel, together with Clement and the rest of my fellow workers, whose names are in the book of life. In this church that gathers at Philippi, Paul has written because there is a problem. And it's a pretty spectacular one. See, there are these two dear sweet saints that aren't getting along. Something has happened and they are at odds. Notice Paul doesn't chastise anyone. Paul doesn't question the behavior. He just looks at the situation for what it is, something that needs remedied. Now, we don't know what the issue was. Kind of funny, isn't it? How in all organizations, in all families, something always happens to disrupt the peace. Have you noticed that? I mean, the other day in my house, we were trying to decide what movies to watch. You wouldn't think that would spark great discussion, but it does. You see, there are different genres that we enjoy in the Wiley household. Not calling out anyone in particular, but some of us like action and adventure. Some of us like romantic comedies. Some of us like musicals. Some of us detest musicals. It's just a struggle. We talk about it. Fortunately, it never gets to this point where we decide, well, we're not going to talk to each other for a while. But it seems to happen. I mean, it's just not the Wiley household. There's a house just about, an hour and a half north of here called the House of Representatives that seems to always be at odds with other parts. And it doesn't matter what the topic is. I say it's blue. Well, I say it's green. And then sometimes, just to keep us on our toes, they switch sides. Have you ever noticed that? And the ones that were calling it blue now call it green. So, of course, the other side must, oh, no, it's blue. We have the same thing going on here. These two women have gotten to a point where they cannot, will not agree. Now, these two ladies are very special to Paul. When he first arrived in Philippi and he was establishing that church, they were co-laborers with him. There was a time they agreed. There was a time that they worked in unity with humility, pushing forward to accomplish the goal. But something happened. There was a disagreement. And like most disagreements, I'm sure it was something just very subtle at first. When Julie and I were first married, you see, she wasn't supposed to be here this morning. She was supposed to be over with the 1st to 4th graders, and lo and behold, she's in the congregation. So, there could be feedback here. You just don't know. When we were first married, one of the biggest arguments that we had was over something so terribly important. It was called toothpaste. We shared a tube of toothpaste because that's what married people do. We were newlyweds. We didn't know any better. One of us was a middle squeezer. And one of us was an end squeezer. See the problems coming up? The middle squeezer squeezes and gets all the toothpaste removed in that portion of the tube. So the end squeezer has to squeeze more and more and more. And it pained me terribly to squeeze more and more and more. And I asked, I was just, a 27-year-old guy. Why are you doing something so stupid? And I meant it with all the love and compassion I could muster. And she looked at me. And at that moment, I knew I had done something heinous. I didn't know what it was, but it was heinous. We have been able to overcome the great battle of toothpaste. There are his toothpaste and there is her toothpaste. But you see, it started with something pretty silly. But who knows what could have come out of it if we remained entrenched. Can you imagine if she would have responded back to me? Well, squeezing from the end's the dumbest thing I've ever heard. Can you imagine? And of course it would escalate because I'm a guy. I must win. I don't care about collateral damage. At that moment, you're just thinking about winning the argument. Can you imagine how that would play out? Newlyweds. Well, fine, I'll throw out some kind of threat. I really don't know what I could have done to, make anything better or worse because, I'm not all that handy, so not fixing something would actually be a blessing. She would have probably responded in like kind and said, well, I won't cook, which would have been a problem, which would have probably just made me mad. And then all of a sudden, you're just over everything. Now, fortunately, that never came to pass in our situation. But sometimes that does come to pass in churches. everybody means well, they just come at a problem from a different viewpoint. And somewhere along the way, those old competitive juices kick in. The adrenaline starts pumping. I will win the argument. And you know, some of the most profound and hotly debated things in a church are colors of carpeting. I like blue. I like red. They're red people. And then it oozes over to other things. Have you ever noticed that? When you have a minor disagreement with someone over just one topic, it has a way of growing and not growing, multiplying. That all of a sudden they bring up something like, hey, who wants to go on a mission trip to pick a location? I heard like 6 things and it came out like, Charlotte. So we're going to Charlotte. Well, they recommended we go there. I don't want to go there. Why would I want to go there? I want to go to Omaha. Because, you know, you need to have something just as ridiculous as the other. And all of a sudden, every time anything comes up, you can just bank on side A and side B. And that's where Yodia and Syntyche are finding themselves. Once so driven to be unified, to do the kingdom work, they're now taking a step back and they're just... Paul implores, and we don't know who it is, that the true companions step in and settle this. Help these ladies. Because Paul knows what the church can be if these two are unified. If only they were unified, so much more could transpire. Through all of this, both of the ladies are still highly regarded. During the rough times, these ladies prayed and supported Paul. And now, there is something drastically amiss. The whole aim of the book has been to reunify them. How many of you have had multiple kids? Or at least 2? You can just do 2. Yeah, of course. Aren't kids wonderful, and aren't their fights wonderful? There is nothing like siblings going at each other. It just highlights everything we're talking about. Because it's usually over really important stuff like crayons. And who took that last piece of paper that's been ripped? Because that's the greatest toy ever. And it just festers, and they're constantly at each other and trying to bring them back. They just don't hear it. There are no fights like family fights. But you know what you learn as a parent? If you work the kids hard enough, you tire them out. And they don't have the energy to fight. Isn't that a beautiful thing? Get a little cranky, go do some yard work. Wait a minute. My wife had me replacing fence yesterday. Maybe that toothpaste issue isn't solved quite yet. But when you are busy accomplishing a goal and you're putting all of your effort into it and your strength and your training and your mind, and you're doing it right, or maybe even sometimes when you're doing it wrong and having to redo it, it wears you out enough that you get along. Paul has told them, okay, we need to be about unity, humility, and service, directed towards the cause of Christ. And it hasn't fully happened, and he implores another to step in and help soothe the situation over. Unfortunately, we're left hanging. We aren't told if it actually works or not. But Paul moves on with rejoice. In the Lord always, and again I tell you, rejoice. Have you ever tried to rejoice with someone you are holding a grudge against? Or let me ask you, when you celebrate something, when there's an event in your life you are celebrating, how many of you call your arch nemesis and invite them? Well, that's probably a good answer because I'm sure none of you have arch nemesis. Paul calls for the whole church to rejoice. In whatever you find that has been done well, celebrate. Because we can all agree there are a few things that are going on well, even here in Philippi at the moment. Redirect the attention. Paul goes on to tell us where our attention should be directed in 2 verses. On whatever is true. Reflect on what is true. Have you ever noticed the amount of problems that have come about in our world because of people working and practicing erroneous concepts? Something they thought was a good idea that just wasn't true, just wasn't quite accurate. How much sorrow comes from that? You know, kind of like me approaching my wife and saying, it's the stupidest thing you could ever do, squeezing the bottle from the middle. Is there anything wrong with squeezing the toothpaste tube from the middle? Does our nation have a law against it? Oh, we're quiet today. Come on, folks. Wake up. There's no federal, state, or local law, to the best of my knowledge. Is there any scriptural mandate? Thou shalt squeeze the tube only from the end. Has anyone read that? I haven't. So what did that come down to? Merely a preference. I desire a toothpaste tube to look nice and full, and you can determine how much toothpaste is left just by glancing where that indentation is. I never let go. I have issues. But my wife is working with me on my issues. My OCD shows up in some really strange ways, you know, with toothpaste. That's about it. Are you sure? Thanks, Debbie. It's about preference. That issue is about preference. Are there things going on in the Wiley household that we should celebrate? Of course. Do we let the toothpaste get in the way? I would hope not. Paul is calling on the church of Philippi to do the same thing. No matter what your individual preferences are, lay it aside and go with the truth. We won't even get into the Crest-Colgate debate. Whatever is true, whatever we can look at and say, we know beyond a shadow of a doubt, this is accurate. Whatever is honorable. There are some things that might be accurate that aren't honorable. You just have to look at some of the laws that have been passed in the last, 3 years. Whatever is honorable. You see, that word also has a flair of spirituality in it in the original context. It's not just what is good, it is what is godly. What else should we think on, Paul? Whatever is just. Translation, righteous. Not just carefree, not just what we think is a good idea, but what is right. Think on whatever is pure. Isn't that why we love little children? Even when they come up to us and they say things that make their parents go, you know, like when little kids come up to you and go, "You're not very smart, are you?" "Mr. Jack, are you pregnant?" You can't get mad. You might want to, you just can't. So pure, innocent. Concentrate on those things. You see, there's no agenda there. They're not trying to say, "Dude, you need to lose some weight." They just look at you and you look like their mom looked 6 months ago. And they wonder. Whatever is lovely. Be careful here. Whatever is lovely does not mean the latest new shiny gadget. Lovely here has a sense of attraction, attractiveness. Do you know what I mean? Those people that just make you feel better when you're in their presence. People who just seem to have their whole lives ordered in such a way that you say, "Man, I wish I was more like that." People who seem to have their house in order and actually do. There is something attractive about that. Not attractive in a sensual kind of way, attractive in a way of, man, that'll work. I'd like to be more like that. Whatever is commendable. We should think on those things that are worth reproducing. A sweet spirit, a caring nature, a loving heart. If there is any excellence or anything worthy of praise, think about those things. Do you see how Paul is trying to take the attention off of one's preferences? Our preferences get us in trouble. Paul is trying to bring these two folks back together, and in so doing, that whole church. And he makes a statement to them also, "Let your reasonableness be known to everyone." When was the last time someone came up to you and said, "Man, I thank you for being such a reasonable person. Reasonable. Willingness to cooperate. Reasonableness. Willing to lay aside our preference, our desire, our rights to help someone along. Reasonableness. The Lord is at hand. Do not be anxious about anything. Oh my, that hits home harshly. I am just anxious about everything. I like things done yesterday. The unfinished leaves me a little nervous. Do not be anxious about anything, but in everything, by prayer and supplication with thanksgiving, let your requests be made known to God. Do not worry about stuff. Pray. Oh man, that goes against our 21st century Western civilization culture. Pastor, don't you realize there are bills to pay? Doesn't give a footnote there saying don't be anxious about anything with the exception of bills, taxes, welfare, health, children. Do not be anxious, but in everything be prayerful. Did you catch the two things there Paul is telling us is so important? Be reasonable and be prayerful. But what if I don't like what's happening? Be reasonable. Is it against the law? Is it against God's moral law? Is it against Scripture? If not, well, you know what? Maybe it's okay. Reasonable. Willingness to accept a different side. And then, in your reasonableness, be prayerful. Take your petitions to God. Now, again, I come back to what I said a few weeks ago. Make sure that your prayer life is proper. And a proper prayer life says that if all of your prayers are answered, the world is different, not just your world. Reasonable and prayerful. And the peace of God, which surpasses all understanding, will guard your hearts and your minds in Christ. The peace of God that is beyond all of our human contemplation, all of our human efforts, all of our strategic thinking. That's what Paul's telling us. And now that's a far cry from where we are in the U.S. today. Business principles are we need to be intentional, we need to think strategically, we need to incorporate a vision statement. Let's work towards that vision statement and let's get her done. God is telling us that we can plan. We can make efforts to achieve stuff. But unless He's behind it, you just wasted hours. Reasonableness and prayerfulness leads to God's power that surpasses all human understanding. If we're reasonable and we're prayerful, God leads us through. And you notice it said to guard your mind? So even if your prayer isn't answered in the way you think it should be, desire, it will be okay. God is still on his throne. Verse 9, what you have learned and received and heard and seen in me, practice these things, and the God of peace will be with you. Man, Paul makes it sound so easy. Well, Paul has said there in verse 9, he wraps this all up in a very simple way, but he does it in Paul's style. Paul was a pastor. Why use 3 words when 27 would suffice? What Paul has said here is, folks, hear it. And once you've heard it, understand it. And once you've understood it, apply it. That's verse 9. When you have learned, when you have heard it, and received and heard and seen, when you receive something and you hear it and you've seen it, you have experienced it. And when you experience something, you learn about it. And there is no learning like experience. Do y'all remember that joke? That the boy was supposed to learn about cats for a school project? And it's dating itself. He took out the Encyclopedia Britannica and he read about cats. And he came away with a lot of stuff, but he learned 100% more about cats when he grabbed his by the tail and lifted. There is an experience that doesn't go away. You understand. And once you understand, apply your understanding. In this case, the boy learned that you shouldn't lift cats by their tail. Teens, please do not try and recreate this experiment. You know, it's the same way with God. Once we have heard God and we understand God and we have that experience with Him, oh man, it's so sweet and it's so wonderful and it's reason for rejoicing that we can't help but apply it. We put those processes into our lives so that others can experience that newness, that freshness, that goodness. Paul was coming at this book, the epistle to the Philippians, trying to hit 2 specific targets. To lay aside their differences, come back and be a force for the kingdom. And he lays it out in so many different ways for those that have ears to hear. And yet sometimes in our reading we miss it. We don't know what happened to those 2 ladies. We don't have 100% certainty who they were. Some have wondered if Lydia wasn't one of them. You know, that great saint we read about in Acts? Perhaps. We know that they were both crucial to that church. We know that they were saints that had a different perspective. but our God is a God of reconciliation with each other and with Him. And really, when we step back and we take a look at our lives, and we understand where God is moving and how He acts, the reason we gather together here is to celebrate the great things He has done for us. For forgiveness, for salvation, for those moments that He covered our hurts in such a real way that we knew we were loved. And in turn, we look at those that gather with us and know they've had that same experience. And we bond together that others might experience it. Because whether we really realize it or not, people don't like to fight. They don't like to argue. They don't like to constantly be. That's why we have 2 tubes of toothpaste in our bathroom. Church, is there someone you need reconciled to? Is there someone that you're harboring the slightest grudge with? See, that can be a clog in the whole machine. And it doesn't allow us to take on that peace that surpasses all understanding. I hear it. But Pastor, I'm right, and that person is wrong. Okay. Is it getting any better because you're right and they're wrong? Is it something that rises to the level of verse 7 of truth and honorableness? Is it something you're being reasonable about? Are you praying about it? You see, we aren't supposed to be at odds with each other. Ever. We are not to be adversarial. We are to be joined in unity over all of it. If you find yourselves wondering, I'm going to ask you to do something a little different today. I'm going to ask that you go to that individual today, over the course of the week, and just say you're sorry the relationship is strained. That's it. Not why it's strained, not who strained it, definitely not, in spite of your being stupid, I am really sorry this isn't working. That's not what we're talking about. Just, I'm sorry something has strained our relationship, and I would like to start over. And let's see what God might do in our families, in our community, oh my goodness, in our politics. Church or nation. You see, God is a God that wants to bring us together one-on-one and with Him. What better day to start that than today? As our musicians come, saints, I want you to be praying if there is someone you need to go to. If there is someone that you need to resolve an issue. Doesn't matter how big or small. Let us do business with God and with each other, that His name might be glorified.
Just as I am.